Princess Zarathel stood before the massive crystalline window of her father's throne room, her four arms crossed in defiance as she watched the human diplomatic vessel approach their homeworld of Veldar. The ship was ugly by her people's standards, all harsh angles and metal plating where Veltharian vessels flowed like liquid starlight. Everything about it screamed primitive technology and barbaric design philosophy. Mother, why am I being forced to wed a human? Zarathel's voice carried the melodic undertones that marked her as royalty among the Veltharians, but today those tones were sharp with anger. Her translucent blue skin shimmered with the bioluminescent patterns that displayed her emotional state, currently a furious crimson that pulsed along her neck and shoulders. Queen Mother Isis Andra glided across the polished floor, her own skin displaying the calm silver patterns of someone who had ruled for 3 centuries. Because, my daughter, the humans have proven themselves to be more than we initially believed. The Galactic Council's assessment was incomplete. Incomplete. Zarathel spun to face her mother, her large violet eyes flashing. They're barely past their industrial age. They've only had faster-than-light travel for, 50 of their years. Their lifespans are pathetically short, they're physically weak, and they have only 2 arms. How could such primitive beings possibly be suitable for an alliance marriage with the Veltharian Empire? The Queen Mother's expression grew distant as she recalled recent events that had shaken the very foundation of galactic politics. 3 months ago, the Kethmori horde attacked the Terran colony of New Geneva. Intelligence suggested it would fall within hours. The humans had only a small garrison, perhaps 2,000 soldiers against 50,000 Kethmori warriors. Zarathel's anger flickered with curiosity. The Kethmori were the galaxy's most feared warriors, standing nearly 3 meters tall with natural armor plating and centuries of conquest behind them. And not only did New Geneva hold, the humans counterattacked. 2,000 soldiers, princess. They didn't just defend, they routed an army 25 times their size. The Queen Mother's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. When our intelligence officers investigated, they discovered something the Galactic Council had overlooked in their initial assessments, which was, humans don't fight like any species we've encountered. Every other sapient race fights for territory, resources, or dominance. Humans fight for each other. Isis Andra moved to stand beside her daughter at the window. The Kethmori expected them to surrender when faced with impossible odds. Instead, the humans became more dangerous the more desperate their situation became. Zarathel frowned, trying to understand. That makes no tactical sense. Desperation should lead to mistakes, panic, poor decision-making. For any rational species, yes. But humans aren't entirely rational, and that's what makes them terrifying. The Queen Mother activated a holographic display showing battle footage from New Geneva. Watch this. The recording showed a human soldier, a young male who couldn't have been more than 25 years old, charging a Kethmori battle formation. His left arm hung useless at his side, blood streamed down his face, and his weapon was nearly depleted. Any sane being would have retreated or surrendered. Instead, he screamed something in a human language and detonated an explosive device he'd strapped to his chest, taking down 6 Kethmori warriors and buying his squad time to reach better cover. He died, Zarathel observed quietly. Yes, but his death saved 12 other humans, who went on to save others. This pattern repeated hundreds of times throughout the battle. Humans will sacrifice themselves for strangers, for ideals, for the simple principle that some things matter more than individual survival. The Queen Mother paused the recording. After New Geneva, 17 different species requested military alliance treaties with humanity. The Galactic Council has reclassified humans from emerging species to strategic priority. Zarathel's bioluminescent patterns had shifted from angry red to the deep blue of confusion. But they're still primitive. Their technology is advancing at an unprecedented rate. What took our people 10,000 years to develop, humans have accomplished in 2,000. Their computers are already superior to ours in several categories. Their medical technology has identified solutions to problems our scientists have worked on for millennia. Isis Andra gestured toward the approaching human vessel, and their diplomatic corps has proven remarkably adept at forming beneficial relationships. So this marriage is purely political, Zarathel said bitterly. Trade my happiness for a strategic alliance. The Queen Mother's patterns shifted to the warm gold of maternal affection mixed with regret. All royal marriages are political, daughter. But the human delegate specifically requested this arrangement after reviewing the profiles of available Veltharian royalty. He chose you. He chose me, like selecting merchandise. The red patterns were returning to Zarathel's skin. Read his file. Isisandra activated another holographic display. Ambassador Marcus Chun, age 32, decorated military veteran, holds advanced degrees in xenobiology and comparative cultural studies. Lost both parents in a Kethmori raid on a civilian transport. Spent 6 years hunting the war band responsible. When he caught them, he didn't execute them. He spent 2 years learning their language and culture, then convinced them to join the human military as advisors. Zarathel studied the human's image. He was tall for his species, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. His face bore a scar along the left cheek, and his posture suggested military training. Nothing about him seemed particularly impressive by Veltharian standards, yet something in his expression suggested depths that weren't immediately apparent. He requested detailed information about Veltharian culture, our history, our art, our philosophy. The Queen Mother continued. When told about your research into cross-species botanical genetics, he spent 3 weeks learning enough about the subject to hold an intelligent conversation. When he discovered you'd written poetry, he studied Veltharian verse forms until he could compose acceptable examples. He studied my poetry. Zarathel felt her patterns shift to the pale silver of surprise. More than studied. He translated several of your pieces into his native language, then back into Veltharian to test his understanding of the subtle meanings. Isisandra smiled. His translations were clumsy, but showed genuine effort to understand not just the words, but the emotions behind them. For the first time since learning of her engagement, Zarathel felt something other than anger or resignation. The idea that someone from an alien species would spend weeks trying to understand her inner thoughts was unexpected. The Galactic Council believes this alliance could reshape the balance of power, the Queen Mother continued. The humans' rapid technological advancement, combined with our manufacturing capabilities and established trade networks, could create an economic partnership that benefits both species enormously. And if we're incompatible? If the cultural differences are too great, then the marriage can be dissolved after the initial treaty period. 2 years to establish whether a permanent alliance is beneficial. Isisandra's tone became gentle. But I suggest you approach this with an open mind, daughter. Humans may be primitive in some ways, but they've surprised us before. The throne room's massive doors chimed, announcing an arrival. King Telandris entered, his massive frame, even larger than his daughter's, moving with a fluid grace that marked him as one of the greatest warriors in Veltharian history. His skin displayed the deep purple patterns of serious consideration. The human vessel has docked, he announced. Ambassador Chun requests permission to address the royal family before the formal ceremonies begin. Unusual, the Queen Mother noted. The standard protocol calls for private meetings after the public ceremony. The human said he had something important to discuss that might affect our decisions. Telandris's patterns showed mild amusement. I found his directness refreshing after months of traditional diplomatic discourse. Zarathel felt her breathing quicken. In a few moments, she would meet the alien she was expected to marry. Everything in her education told her this was wrong. Veltharians and humans were too different, the cultural barriers too great, the genetic incompatibilities too significant. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. Humans had surprised everyone before. Send him in, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. The throne room doors opened again, and Ambassador Marcus Chun entered alone. Zarathel had expected him to be accompanied by advisors, security personnel, or at least a translator, but the human walked into the chamber with only a small datapad in his hand. He was taller than she'd expected, and his movements showed the controlled precision of someone comfortable with physical conflict. But what struck her most was his eyes. They swept the room not with the calculating assessment of a politician, but with genuine curiosity and what appeared to be appreciation for Veltharian artistry. Marcus stopped at the appropriate distance from the throne and performed a creditable approximation of a Veltharian formal bow. When he spoke, his accent was thick, but his grammar was correct. Your Majesties, Princess Zarathel, I am honored by your willingness to meet with me. His voice was deeper than most human males, with a quality that somehow reminded Zarathel of the ceremonial drums used in traditional festivals. I realize this situation is unusual for all of us, and I wanted to address any concerns before we proceed with formal negotiations. King Telandris leaned forward slightly. You speak our language well, Ambassador. I'm still learning, Your Majesty. I hope my mistakes do not cause offense. Marcus's skin showed slight color changes around his cheeks, a human expression of embarrassment that Zarathel found oddly endearing. I wanted to speak with Princess Zarathel directly, because I believe there may be misconceptions about human intentions in this arrangement, such as Zarathel found herself speaking before her parents could respond. Marcus turned to face her fully, and she was struck by the intelligence in his brown eyes. Your Highness, I suspect you believe this marriage is purely a political arrangement imposed upon you by circumstances beyond your control. The accuracy of his assessment sent shocked patterns across Zarathel's skin before she could control them. Is it not? Partially, yes, Marcus admitted with startling honesty. The alliance between our peoples is strategically important to both sides. But I want you to understand that I requested this arrangement specifically after learning about you, not simply because you were available. My mother mentioned that. Why? The question came out more bluntly than Zarathel had intended. Marcus consulted his data pad briefly. May I approach, Your Highness? I have something to show you. King Telandris nodded permission, and Marcus walked closer to the royal family. From his pad, he projected a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a garden, but not any garden Zarathel had ever seen. The plants were clearly of human origin, but they had been arranged according to Veltharian aesthetic principles. Spiral patterns that mimicked the mathematical relationships found in Veltharian architecture, color combinations that followed traditional harmonic sequences, and growth patterns that suggested the flowing script of ancient Veltharian poetry. I read about your research into cross-species botanical genetics, Marcus said quietly. Your paper on adaptive plant evolution across different planetary environments was fascinating, but what caught my attention were the artistic elements in your experimental designs. You weren't just trying to create functional hybrid species. You were trying to create beauty. Zarathel stared at the garden display. Where is this? My family stayed on Earth. I spent 6 months creating it after reading your work. Marcus's cheeks showed more of the color change that indicated embarrassment. I wanted to understand how someone could combine scientific rigor with aesthetic sensibility so seamlessly. The garden is my attempt to answer the question you pose in your paper about whether beauty serves an evolutionary function or transcends purely practical considerations. And what conclusion did you reach? Zarathel's voice was barely a whisper. That beauty and function aren't opposites. They're different aspects of the same fundamental truth. Your work suggests that organisms which achieve aesthetic harmony with their environment are actually more evolutionarily successful than those that focus purely on efficiency. Marcus looked directly into her violet eyes. I think the same principle applies to relationships between individuals and possibly between species. The silence in the throne room stretched for several heartbeats. Zarathel felt her bioluminescent patterns shifting through colors she couldn't control, surprise, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite identify. You build a garden to understand my research? She finally asked. I built a garden to understand you, Marcus corrected gently. Your research was just the starting point. Queen Mother Isisandra exchanged glances with her husband, both their patterns showing surprised approval. In 3 centuries of diplomatic experience, neither had encountered an approach quite like this. Ambassador Chun, the king said formally, are you prepared to enter into the traditional courtship period that precedes a marriage alliance? With respect, Your Majesty, I'd like to propose a modification to the traditional approach. Marcus straightened, and Zarathel could see the military training in his posture. Instead of the formal courtship rituals, I'd like to suggest a collaborative research project. I beg your pardon? Zarathel's confusion was evident in her voice. Marcus turned back to her. Your Highness, you're working on adaptive botanical genetics. I have access to plants from 17 different worlds that humans have colonized, many with environmental conditions that don't exist in Veltharian space. What if we spent the next few months working together to test your theories on a larger scale than either of us could manage alone? The suggestion was so unexpected that Zarathel found herself speechless. A research collaboration instead of traditional courtship rituals? The idea was unprecedented, possibly scandalous, and absolutely fascinating. Such an arrangement would be highly irregular, the Queen Mother said carefully. Yes, Your Majesty, but so is everything else about this situation, Marcus replied. We're trying to determine whether two very different species can form a successful partnership. What better way to test that than by working toward a common goal that requires both our strengths? King Telendris's patterns shifted to the deep gold that indicated he was considering something that intrigued him. Princess, what is your opinion? Zarathel realized that everyone in the room was waiting for her response. The human, Marcus, was watching her with patient attention, clearly prepared to accept whatever decision she made. Her parents were displaying the careful neutrality that meant they would support her choice, but wouldn't influence it. For the first time since learning of her engagement, Zarathel felt like she had actual control over her future. I would need to see detailed specifications for your available plant specimens, she said slowly, and full environmental data for the worlds you mentioned. Marcus smiled, the first entirely human expression she'd seen from him. I have preliminary data with me, and detailed files can be transmitted within hours. Then, yes, Ambassador Chun, I believe a research collaboration would be educational. Please, Your Highness, call me Marcus. As he spoke, Zarathel noticed that his bioluminescent patterns were shifting to pale blue, the color of hope mixed with determination. It wasn't until later that she realized what was significant about that observation. Marcus Chun was developing Veltharian bioluminescence. Either the human was far more adaptable than anyone had realized, or something unprecedented was happening between their species. The formal negotiations would take days to complete, but as Zarathel watched Marcus explain his research proposals with growing enthusiasm, she began to suspect that her mother had been right about humans being full of surprises. She just hadn't expected the surprises to be quite so intriguing. 3 weeks into their research collaboration, Zarathel found herself looking forward to her daily meetings with Marcus Chun in ways that confused and intrigued her. The human had proven to be everything she'd hoped for in a research partner, and several things she hadn't expected in any male of any species. He was, for instance, completely unimpressed by her royal status. Your methodology here is flawed, Marcus said bluntly, pointing to a section of her experimental design displayed on the laboratory's main screen. They were working in the Royal Botanical Research Facility, a massive greenhouse complex that could simulate dozens of different planetary environments. You're assuming that atmosphere pressure variations will have minimal impact on cellular adaptation rates. But the data from Kepler 442b suggests pressure differentials can accelerate genetic expression by up to 300%. That's impossible, Zarathel replied, her patterns flashing the orange of academic disagreement. Cellular adaptation requires generational development. Pressure changes might affect individual plant health, but genetic expression operates on evolutionary timescales. Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing time-lapse growth patterns from his garden on Earth, not with Earth flora adapted to human terraforming techniques. Watch this. The display showed a hybrid plant that combined Terran climbing vines with what appeared to be Veltharian root systems. As simulated pressure changes were applied, the plant's growth patterns visibly shifted, new cellular structures developing within hours rather than generations. How is that possible? Zarathel's confusion was evident in both her voice and her rapidly shifting bioluminescent patterns. Humans discovered something about genetics that most other species missed, Marcus explained, manipulating the display to show cellular structures in greater detail. We always assumed genetic adaptation was a response to environmental pressure over long periods. But what if genetics are actually designed to respond to cooperative stimulation? Cooperative stimulation? Marcus activated another display, this one showing human agricultural techniques. Every other species practices what you might call competitive agriculture. They find plants that can survive in their environment and cultivate those. Humans practice symbiotic agriculture. We don't just grow plants. We grow them in partnership with other organisms that benefit both species. The display showed complex soil ecosystems where dozens of different organisms work together to create growing conditions that were superior to anything any single species could achieve alone. Bacteria that fixed nitrogen worked alongside fungi that broke down complex minerals, while insects pollinated plants that in turn provided shelter for small animals that contributed their own biological benefits. Zarathel paused, trying to process the implications. This suggests that human evolution itself is fundamentally cooperative rather than competitive. Exactly. Marcus's enthusiasm was evident in his expression and in increasingly bright bioluminescent patterns that continued to develop across his skin. Most species evolve through competition, survival of the fittest, adaptation to environmental pressure, dominance hierarchies. Humans evolved through cooperation. We succeeded not by being the strongest or fastest or smartest, but by being the best at working together. Zarathel moved closer to examine the data and found herself very aware of Marcus's proximity. He smelled different from Veltharian males, not unpleasant, but distinctly alien. There was something sharp and warm about his scent that she was beginning to find oddly comforting. "If this is accurate," she said slowly, "it would explain the New Geneva incident my mother described. Humans don't just fight for survival. They fight for the survival of their cooperative partnerships. And it suggests," Marcus added quietly, "that human Veltharian partnerships might be more compatible than anyone realized." Their eyes met, and Zarathel felt her patterns shift to colors she'd never displayed before. Deep purple shot through with silver, indicating a combination of attraction and intellectual excitement that had no equivalent in traditional Veltharian emotional displays. Marcus's own patterns responded, his skin showing warm gold mixed with the same deep purple. Either they were both developing entirely new forms of bioluminescence, or something unprecedented was happening between their species. "Princess," Marcus said formally, but his voice carried undertones that suggested the formality was becoming difficult to maintain. "There's something I need to tell you about the marriage treaty." The moment shattered, and Zarathel felt her patterns shift to the pale blue of apprehension. "What about it?" "The standard political marriage requires a 2-year trial period followed by formal dissolution if the partnership proves incompatible," Marcus said carefully. "But there's a clause in the treaty that allows for immediate nullification if either party finds the arrangement genuinely unbearable." Zarathel's patterns went completely silver, the Veltharian equivalent of emotional shutdown. "Are you saying you want to nullify our engagement?" "I'm saying I want you to know that you have that option." Marcus stepped closer, and she could see the sincerity in his brown eyes. "Zarathel, I don't want you to feel trapped in this arrangement. If working with me has convinced you that humans and Veltharians are too different, or if you simply find the idea of marriage to an alien personally distasteful, you can end this without political consequences." The use of her name rather than her title sent warm patterns across her skin before she could stop them. No non-Veltharian had ever spoken her name with such careful attention to the proper tonal inflections. "What if I don't want to end it?" The words came out before Zarathel had consciously decided to speak them. Marcus's patterns brightened considerably. "Then, I'd like to propose expanding our research collaboration." "How so?" "Your work focuses on plant genetics, but the principles should apply to any biological system." Marcus activated a new holographic display, this one showing comparative anatomy charts for dozens of different species. "What if we tested your theories on animal genetics, bacterial adaptation, even sapient species evolution?" Zarathel stared at the display, her scientific mind immediately grasping the implications. Such a project would require facilities on multiple worlds, cooperation from research institutions across the galaxy, years of coordinated effort, and a permanent partnership between human and Veltharian research teams, Marcus added. The marriage treaty could be restructured as a research alliance with personal commitment elements. "You want to marry me to expand our research project?" Zarathel's patterns flashed with amusement despite her confusion. "I want to marry you because working with you these past 3 weeks has been the most intellectually stimulating experience of my life," Marcus said with characteristic directness. "The research expansion is just a convenient excuse to spend the rest of my career collaborating with someone who challenges every assumption I've ever made about biology, evolution, and the nature of intelligence itself." The honesty of his statement sent complex patterns racing across Zarathel's skin. No Veltharian male had ever courted her with offers of intellectual partnership. Royal courtship typically involved demonstrations of physical prowess, artistic achievement, or political acumen. The idea that someone might find her mind more attractive than her status was revolutionary. "There's something else," Marcus continued, consulting his datapad. "The preliminary results from our first experimental trials are showing something unexpected." He activated another display, This one showing cellular analysis from plants they've been growing under different cooperative cultivation techniques. The hybrid species we've been developing aren't just adapting to multiple environment types. They're developing characteristics that don't exist in either parent species. Zarathel leaned forward to study the data more closely. That's impossible. Hybrid genetics combine existing traits. They don't create new ones. Look at the cellular structure analysis. Marcus highlighted specific sections of the display. These plants are developing photosynthetic capabilities that are more efficient than anything found in nature. They're not just combining human and Veltharian agricultural techniques. They're transcending both approaches to create something entirely new. The implications hit Zarathel like a physical impact. You're suggesting that cooperative partnerships between different species can produce capabilities that exceed what either species can achieve alone. I'm suggesting that evolution isn't just about adaptation to environment. It's about adaptation to relationships. Marcus's voice carried excitement that was evident in both his expression and his bioluminescent patterns. And if that's true for plants, it might be true for sapient species as well. Zarathel felt her breathing quicken as she understood what he was really saying. You think humans and Veltharians working together might develop capabilities that neither species possesses individually. I think we might already be developing those capabilities. Marcus gestured to his own skin, where bioluminescent patterns were now clearly visible. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't produce control color changes. Now I'm displaying emotional states and patterns that don't exist in human physiology. Zarathel looked down at her own hands, where she could see subtle changes in skin texture that she'd never noticed before. Her fingers seemed more dexterous, better adapted for fine manipulation work, exactly the kind of enhancement that would benefit someone working with delicate research equipment. "This is unprecedented," she whispered. "This is terrifying," Marcus corrected with a slight smile. "We're potentially witnessing real-time evolution driven by cooperative partnership rather than environmental pressure. If we're right, this could revolutionize our understanding of how sapient species develop. And if we're wrong, then we've still learned more about cross-species collaboration in 3 weeks than most researchers discover in a lifetime." Marcus's patterns showed calm confidence. "Either way, I can't think of anyone I'd rather explore these questions with." The research facility's communications system chimed, interrupting their conversation. Queen Mother Isosandra's image appeared in the holographic display, her patterns showing the formal neutrality of official business. "Princess, Ambassador Chun, I hope your work is progressing well." "Very well, Mother," Zarathel replied, noting that her own patterns had shifted to colors that indicated contentment mixed with excitement. "We've made some fascinating discoveries." "I'm pleased to hear that. I'm contacting you because the Galactic Council has requested an update on the Human-Veltharian Alliance negotiations." The Queen Mother's patterns shifted slightly, indicating there was more to this communication than simple diplomatic routine. Specifically, they want to know whether the marriage alliance should proceed as planned. Zarathel felt Marcus's attention focus on her with laser intensity. This was the moment when she needed to make a decision that would affect not just her own future, but potentially the relationship between their two species. "Mother," she said carefully, "I would like to proceed with the marriage alliance, but with modifications to the standard treaty structure." "What sort of modifications?" Marcus stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we would like to restructure the arrangement as a permanent research partnership with personal commitment elements, rather than a traditional political marriage. The alliance would focus on collaborative, scientific advancement, rather than purely diplomatic objectives." The Queen Mother's patterns showed surprise, then consideration. Such an arrangement would be unprecedented, but not necessarily problematic. What would be the practical implications? Zarathel and I would establish joint research facilities on multiple worlds, with the authority to pursue scientific collaboration that benefits both human and Veltharian interests, Marcus explained. The marriage would be both personal and professional, creating a permanent bridge between our species that goes beyond traditional diplomatic relationships. And the political alliance will be strengthened rather than weakened, Zarathel interjected. A partnership based on mutual scientific advancement would create deeper ties than one based purely on political convenience. The Queen Mother was quiet for several moments, her patterns cycling through the complex sequences that indicated she was processing significant political implications. I will need to discuss this with the king and with the Galactic Council representatives, she finally said. But the concept has merit. Are you both certain this is what you want? Zarathel looked at Marcus, seeing in his brown eyes the same combination of excitement and determination that she felt herself. Yes, mother. I believe this could be the beginning of something revolutionary. Then, prepare a formal proposal for review. Include detailed specifications for your research objectives, resource requirements, and timeline projections. The Queen Mother's patterns shifted to warm gold, indicating approval mixed with maternal affection. I must admit, daughter, this approach suits you far better than a traditional political marriage would have. After the communication ended, Zarathel and Marcus stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what they had just committed to. Are we making a terrible mistake? Zarathel asked quietly. Probably, Marcus admitted with a grin that was becoming increasingly familiar. But if we're right about cooperative evolution, terrible mistakes might be exactly what's needed to drive real advancement. And if the Galactic Council rejects our proposal, Marcus's patterns shifted to the deep gold of determination mixed with affection. Then, we'll find another way to continue working together. Some partnerships are too important to abandon just because they don't fit traditional categories. As Zarathel looked at this strange human who had challenged everything she thought she knew about relationships, evolution, and the nature of intelligence itself, she realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, she had stopped thinking of him as an alien. Marcus Chun had become simply Marcus, her research partner, her intellectual equal, and increasingly, someone she couldn't imagine her future without. The political implications were staggering, the scientific possibilities were revolutionary, and the personal risks were terrifying. It was Zarathel thought with patterns that clearly displayed anticipation mixed with deep contentment, exactly the kind of challenge she'd been waiting for her entire life. The Galactic Council's response to their unconventional marriage proposal arrived 6 days later, delivered by a diplomatic courier who seemed barely able to contain their curiosity about the humans who had turned traditional alliance protocols upside down. Zarathel read the message twice before fully believing its contents. They're sending an investigation committee. Marcus looked up from the microscope where he'd been examining cellular samples from their latest hybrid experiments. Define investigation committee. 12 representatives from different species, including a Kethmori war leader, 2 AI consciousness entities, and someone identified only as the Eternal Scholar. Zarathel's patterns shifted to the pale blue of apprehension. They want to observe our research directly and interview us separately about our compatibility. Marcus straightened, and she could see his military training reassert itself in his posture. They think we're either lying about our discoveries or deluding ourselves about the relationship. Can you blame them? Zarathel gestured toward their latest experimental results, displayed on the laboratory's main screen. In 6 weeks, we've documented evolutionary changes that most species require centuries to achieve. We're claiming that cooperative partnership can accelerate biological adaptation to unprecedented levels, and we're using our own relationship as the primary evidence. Marcus moved to stand beside her, and Zarathel noticed that his bioluminescent patterns had become more sophisticated over the past few days. He was now displaying emotional nuances that many Veltharians couldn't achieve. There's another problem, he said quietly. The Kethmori representative is probably war leader Thakmarel. I'm the one who convinced his battle group to join the human military after hunting them for 6 years. Is that going to be awkward? Probably. The Kethmori have very specific ideas about honor, revenge, and appropriate relationships between former enemies. Marcus's patterns showed resigned determination. On the other hand, if anyone can evaluate whether human-alien partnerships are genuinely beneficial, it would be someone who's experienced both human cooperation and human conflict. The laboratory doors chimed, announcing an arrival. King Telandris entered, his massive frame moving with a careful precision that indicated he was wrestling with complex political calculations. Father, Zarathel greeted him formally. Princess, Ambassador Chun. The king's patterns displayed the formal neutrality he used for official business, but Zarathel could see underlying currents of concern. I want to speak with you before the Galactic Council Committee arrives tomorrow. About what? Marcus asked. About the broader implications of your research. Telandris moved to examine their experimental displays, his patterns shifting to deep purple as he absorbed the data. If your theories about cooperative evolution are correct, you're not just proposing a new approach to scientific collaboration. You're suggesting that the fundamental principles governing galactic civilization may be flawed. Zarathel felt her breathing quicken as she understood what her father was saying. Because most interspecies relationships are based on competition or dominance hierarchies rather than genuine cooperation. Precisely. The Galactic Council maintains order through a complex balance of power between different species, each maintaining their own territories, their own specializations, their own spheres of influence. The king's patterns showed the deep gold of serious consideration. If cooperation between species can produce capabilities that exceed what any individual species can achieve, then the entire structure of galactic civilization becomes obsolete. Marcus nodded slowly. And that makes our research a potential threat to established power structures. More than potential, Talandris corrected grimly. 3 days ago, the Zinthri Empire formally requested that the Galactic Council classify your research as a threat to interspecies stability. They're arguing that human-Veltharian cooperation could destabilize the balance of power that has maintained peace for the past millennium. The Zinthri are afraid we might actually succeed, Zarathel realized. The Zinthri are afraid that if you succeed, every other species will demand access to the same collaborative benefits, her father replied. And they're probably right to be afraid. Marcus activated a holographic display showing political maps of the galactic community. How many species are currently locked into competitive rather than cooperative relationships? All of them, Talandris answered bluntly. The entire galactic order is built on the premise that different species are fundamentally incompatible for anything more than limited trade relationships and military alliances. True cooperation, the kind you're proposing, has been considered impossible. Because no one has tried it properly, Zarathel said, her patterns flashing with sudden understanding. Everyone assumed that biological differences made deep cooperation impossible, so they never developed the techniques that would make it work. And now you're demonstrating that not only is it possible, but it produces benefits that no one imagined, the king continued. The political ramifications are staggering. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his patterns cycling through colors that suggested he was processing complex strategic implications. Your Majesty, he finally said, what happens if the investigation committee concludes that our research is genuine, but too dangerous to continue? Then you'll be ordered to cease all cooperative research and return to standard alliance protocols, Talandris replied grimly. The marriage treaty would be restructured as a traditional political arrangement with minimal personal interaction. And if we refuse, then both our species could be expelled from the Galactic Council, losing access to trade networks, mutual defense treaties, and technological exchange programs that both humans and Veltharians depend on for survival. The laboratory fell silent as they all contemplated the magnitude of the forces they had inadvertently challenged. What had begun as a simple research collaboration had evolved into something that threatened the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. There's something else, Talandris said quietly. Intelligence reports suggest that several species are already conducting their own experiments in cooperative partnership based on preliminary data about your research that has leaked through diplomatic channels. Which species? Zarathel asked. The Aquatic Collective has initiated contact with the Silicon Base builders. The hive minds are exploring partnership opportunities with individual consciousness species. Even the AI entities are investigating cooperation with biological organisms. The king's patterns showed concern mixed with anticipation. Your research isn't just challenging the status quo. It's inspiring a galactic-wide revolution in interspecies relationships. Marcus pulled up data from their recent experiments, highlighting sections that showed the most dramatic evolutionary adaptations. If multiple species begin developing cooperative partnerships simultaneously, the rate of advancement could be exponential. We might be looking at a complete transformation of galactic civilization within decades rather than millennia. Or complete chaos if the changes happen too quickly for existing institutions to adapt, Talandris warned. The investigation committee isn't just evaluating your personal compatibility. They're trying to determine whether to allow a process that could remake the entire galaxy. Zarathel felt the weight of responsibility settle on her like a physical burden. So our marriage isn't just personal, and it's not just political. It's potentially the catalyst for the most significant transformation in galactic history. No pressure, Marcus said dryly, but his pattern showed determination rather than anxiety. The king studied them both carefully, his own patterns shifting through complex sequences that suggested he was evaluating their emotional state as much as their words. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Father, Zarathel said slowly, 3 months ago, I thought I was going to spend my life conducting botanical research in relative obscurity. Now, I'm potentially part of something that could change the fundamental nature of civilization itself. Her patterns brightened to warm gold mixed with silver, anticipation tinged with uncertainty. I can't say I'm prepared for it, but I can't imagine walking away from it either. Marcus nodded agreement. Your Majesty, the research we're doing is too important to abandon just because it makes people uncomfortable. If cooperative evolution really works the way our data suggests, then suppressing it would be a disservice to every species in the galaxy. Even if pursuing it destroys the existing order? Especially if pursuing it destroys the existing order, Marcus replied firmly. Any system that depends on preventing beneficial relationships between sapient species is a system that needs to be replaced. Talandris was quiet for a long time, his patterns cycling through colors that suggested he was weighing political calculations against personal convictions. Finally, he displayed the deep purple of serious resolve. Then, you'll have the full support of the Veltharian Empire, regardless of the political consequences. His voice carried the authority of someone who had ruled for centuries. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that the investigation committee will try to separate you, either to test your individual capabilities or to prevent you from influencing each other's responses. How do you mean? Zarathel asked. They may insist on conducting individual interviews, separate research evaluations, even temporary isolation to determine whether your partnership is genuinely beneficial or simply a case of mutual delusion. The king's tone became gentle. Are you confident enough in your relationship to withstand that kind of scrutiny? Zarathel looked at Marcus, seeing in his brown eyes the same mixture of determination and affection that had been growing stronger each day of their collaboration. Marcus, the data speaks for itself, he said quietly. If they want to separate us to test whether our research is valid independently, I'm confident the results will support our conclusions. And personally, Marcus's patterns shifted to warm gold shot through with deep purple, affection mixed with absolute certainty. Zarathel, working with you has changed my understanding of what partnership means. I'm not just confident in our relationship. I'm confident that it represents something fundamentally new and important. Even though we've only known each other for 6 weeks, time isn't the relevant measure, Marcus replied. Compatibility is. And we're more compatible than some couples who've been together for decades. Talandris smiled, the first genuinely pleased expression Zarathel had seen from him since the investigation committee was announced. Then, I believe you'll do well tomorrow. But be prepared for challenges that go far beyond simple relationship evaluation. The next morning, the Galactic Council Investigation Committee arrived in a vessel that dwarfed even the largest Veltharian ships. Zarathel watched from the observation deck as 12 different types of beings disembarked, each representing not just different species, but fundamentally different approaches to consciousness, intelligence, and existence itself. War Leader Thakmarel was immediately recognizable. Nearly 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plating, with 4 arms that ended in claws designed for combat. But he moved with careful precision rather than aggressive posturing, and his expression suggested intellectual curiosity rather than hostility. The AI consciousness entities appeared as shimmering energy fields contained within mobile crystalline matrices. The Eternal Scholar was a mystery, a figure completely concealed within flowing robes that seemed to shift between different colors and textures as it moved. 12 different ways of being intelligent, Marcus observed quietly. If we can convince them that human Veltharian cooperation works, we're essentially arguing that any form of consciousness can benefit from partnership with any other form. No pressure. Zarathel echoed his word from the day before, but her pattern showed excitement rather than anxiety. As they prepared to meet the committee that would determine not just their personal future, but potentially the future of galactic civilization itself, Zarathel realized that somewhere in the past 6 weeks, she had stopped thinking about this as a marriage of convenience. Marcus Chun had become the most important person in her universe, and Their partnership had become something worth fighting for regardless of the political consequences. The investigation was about to begin, and everything they had discovered about cooperation, evolution, and the nature of intelligence itself was going to be tested by the most diverse collection of minds in the galaxy. It was, Zarathel thought as she prepared to defend everything they had built together, exactly the kind of challenge that would prove whether their theories about cooperative partnership were truly revolutionary or simply the delusion of two individuals who had fallen in love with an impossible dream. Either way, they were about to find out. The investigation began at dawn with war leader Thakmarel requesting a private conversation with Marcus. Zarathel watched from the observation deck as they walked through the royal gardens, the massive Kethmori warrior moving with surprising gentleness among the delicate flowering plants. Nervous? Queen Mother Isisindra asked, joining her daughter at the window. Terrified, Zarathel admitted. Not about the research. I'm confident our data is solid. But about what happens if they decide that human-Veltharian partnerships are too dangerous to allow. Your father and I've been discussing that possibility. The Queen Mother's patterns shifted to the deep gold of serious consideration. If the committee rules against you, we're prepared to withdraw from the Galactic Council. Zarathel spun to face her mother, shocked patterns racing across her skin. You would risk our entire civilization's position in galactic society for my marriage. We would risk it for what your marriage represents, Isisandra corrected gently. Daughter, in 6 weeks you and Ambassador Chun have demonstrated evolutionary advancement that our species has been seeking for millennia. The possibility of genuine cooperative evolution between different types of consciousness isn't just scientifically revolutionary. It's the most important development in galactic history. Through the window, they could see Marcus and Thakmarel engaged in what appeared to be intense discussion. The war leader's body language suggested he was asking detailed questions, while Marcus's responses were animated with the enthusiasm he displayed when explaining complex concepts. What do you think they're discussing? Zarathel asked. Probably the fundamental nature of cooperation versus competition in evolutionary development, her mother replied dryly. The Kethmori built their entire civilization on competitive dominance hierarchies. If Marcus can convince Thakmarel that cooperation produces superior results, it would represent a complete philosophical revolution for one of the galaxy's most influential warrior cultures. 2 hours later, Marcus returned alone, his patterns displaying a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. How did it go? Zarathel asked immediately. Better than I expected, Marcus admitted. Thakmarel spent the first hour trying to determine whether I was attempting to deceive him about human motivations for cooperation. When he became convinced that humans genuinely fight for each other rather than for dominance, he became very interested in the practical applications. Practical applications? The Kethmori have been struggling with resource allocation problems for decades. Their competitive approach works well for individual achievement, but it's inefficient for complex logistical challenges. Marcus activated a holographic display showing data he'd apparently prepared during his conversation with the war leader. I suggested that Kethmori's strength, combined with human cooperative logistics, could solve both species' resource management issues. Zarathel studied the display, recognizing the same principles they'd been applying to botanical research. You proposed a human-Kethmori partnership? I proposed that every species partnership could produce capabilities that exceed what either species can achieve alone, Marcus corrected, using our research as the foundation for a completely new approach to interspecies relationships. Before Zarathel could respond, the laboratory's communication system activated. The Eternal Scholar's voice emerged from the speakers, or rather, voices, because the entity seemed to speak in harmonic layers that suggested multiple consciousness streams operating simultaneously. Princess Zarathel, your presence is requested for individual evaluation. Zarathel felt her patterns shift to pale blue apprehension, but Marcus's hand on her shoulder steadied her. Remember, he said quietly, the data supports our conclusions. Trust the research. The meeting with the Eternal Scholar took place in the palace's ancient library, surrounded by crystalline memory storage devices that contained thousands of years of Veltharian knowledge. The scholar itself was even more mysterious in person. Its robes seemed to contain shifting patterns that hurt to look at directly, and its voice carried harmonics that suggested it was accessing multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Princess Zarathel, the entity said without preamble, Explain why you believe cooperative evolution represents a fundamental advance over competitive development. The directness of the question caught Zarathel off guard, but she found herself responding with the same academic precision she would use in a research presentation. Because competitive evolution is limited by the capabilities of individual species, she replied. Each species develops to maximize their own survival advantages, which creates optimization within narrow parameters. Cooperative evolution allows species to transcend individual limitations by combining different types of capabilities. Demonstrate this principle. Zarathel activated the library's holographic displays, pulling up data from her experiments with Marcus. These plants combine human photosynthetic optimization techniques with Veltharian mineral processing capabilities. The result isn't just a hybrid. It's a new form of plant that processes energy more efficiently than anything found in nature. Show me the evolution in your own physiology. The request was unexpected, but Zarathel complied, displaying her hands under magnification that revealed the subtle changes in finger dexterity and skin texture that had developed during her work with Marcus. And Ambassador Chun exhibits corresponding Veltharian adaptations? Yes, his bioluminescent development is more sophisticated than many Veltharians achieve naturally. Zarathel hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. We think we're witnessing real-time evolutionary adaptation driven by cooperative partnership. The Eternal Scholar was quiet for several minutes, its robes shifting through color patterns that defied easy categorization. Are you aware that similar adaptations are being reported by other species who have initiated cooperative partnerships based on preliminary data about your research? My father mentioned that several species were conducting their own experiments. 17 species have reported measurable biological adaptations resulting from sustained cooperative interaction with other species, the scholar continued. The Aquatic Collective and the silicon-based builders have developed hybrid technologies that neither species could create independently. Two different AI consciousness entities have achieved expanded processing capabilities through partnership with biological organisms. Zarathel felt her breathing quicken as she understood the implications. The cooperative evolution principle is working across multiple species combinations. It appears to be a fundamental property of consciousness interaction rather than a specific human Veltharian phenomenon, the scholar agreed. Which raises the question of why this principle has not been discovered previously. Because no one tried sustained cooperative partnership between different species, Zarathel replied. The Galactic Council's structure actively discourages deep cooperation in favor of maintaining competitive balance. And if cooperative evolution proves to be universally applicable, Zarathel realized she was being asked to evaluate the political implications of her own research. Then, the current galactic order becomes obsolete. Competitive balance between species would be replaced by cooperative advancement for all species. With what consequences? Probably massive social upheaval in the short term, but unprecedented advancement in the long term. Zarathel's patterns shifted to the deep purple of serious consideration. Any civilization that actively prevents beneficial cooperation between its members is a civilization that needs fundamental change, even if that change destroys existing power structures. Especially if it destroys existing power structures, Zarathel replied firmly. The current system prioritizes political stability over advancement, which ultimately serves no one's long-term interests. The Eternal Scholar's robes shifted to patterns that might have indicated approval, though with such an alien entity, it was impossible to be certain. Final question, Princess. Are you prepared to accept responsibility for catalyzing changes that could affect every sapient species in the galaxy? Zarathel thought about Marcus, about their research, about the revolutionary implications of everything they had discovered together. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for demonstrating that cooperation between different types of consciousness produces benefits that justify whatever social changes are necessary to make such cooperation possible, even if those changes cause significant disruption to existing civilizations. Scholar, Zarathel said carefully, any civilization that depends on preventing beneficial relationships between its members is a civilization that deserves to be disrupted. The entity was quiet for a long time before finally responding. Your evaluation is complete, Princess. The committee will deliberate and announce our conclusions tomorrow. That evening, Zarathel and Marcus met in their laboratory to review the day's events. Both had undergone extensive individual evaluations, and both reported similar questions about the broader implications of their research. "They're not just evaluating whether our partnership works," Marcus observed. "They're trying to determine whether to allow a process that could fundamentally transform galactic civilization, and whether we're prepared to accept responsibility for that transformation." Zarathel activated displays showing the latest data from their experiments, noting that the evolutionary adaptations were continuing to accelerate. "Marcus, what if we're wrong? What if cooperative evolution produces benefits in the short term, but causes problems we haven't anticipated? Then we'll adapt and find solutions." Marcus replied with the calm confidence that had become one of his most attractive qualities. "The alternative is to suppress beneficial development because change is inherently risky. That's not acceptable, even if the change disrupts the lives of billions of sapient beings. Especially if it improves the lives of billions of sapient beings." Marcus moved to stand beside her at the observation window, where they could see stars representing dozens of different civilizations. "Zarathel, every major advancement in civilization has been disruptive to existing power structures. The question isn't whether change causes problems, it's whether the benefits justify the costs. And you believe they do? I believe that any system which actively prevents beneficial cooperation between different types of consciousness is a system that needs to be replaced." Marcus's patterns shifted to warm gold mixed with determination. Not because change is inherently good, but because preventing beneficial relationships is inherently wrong. They stood together in comfortable silence, both contemplating the magnitude of the decision that the investigation committee would announce the following day. After 6 weeks of research that had begun as simple scientific collaboration, they had discovered something that challenged the fundamental structure of galactic society. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Zarathel said quietly, "I want you to know that working with you has been the most important experience of my life. Even if the committee rules against us. Especially if they rule against us." Zarathel turned to face him directly, her patterns displaying the complex mixture of affection, intellectual excitement, and absolute certainty that had been growing stronger every day. "Marcus, regardless of the political implications, you've shown me that genuine partnership between different types of consciousness isn't just possible. It's transformative in ways we're only beginning to understand." Marcus's patterns responded with warm gold shot through with deep purple, and Zarathel realized that his bioluminescent development had progressed to the point where he was displaying emotional nuances that many Veltharians never achieved. "The committee's decision won't change what we've discovered," he said softly. "If they rule against us, we'll find other ways to continue the research. If they rule in our favor, we'll use the opportunity to help other species develop their own cooperative partnerships. And personally," Marcus smiled with the expression that had become completely familiar over the past weeks. "Personally, Zarathel, I can't imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else. Whether as research partners, marriage allies, or exiled revolutionaries, I want to face whatever comes next together." The following morning would bring the investigation committee's decision about not just their personal future, but the future of interspecies relationships throughout the galaxy. The implications were staggering, the potential consequences were revolutionary, and the responsibility was almost overwhelming. But as Zarathel looked at the human who had become the most important person in her universe, she realized that she was ready for whatever came next. They had discovered something genuinely new and important, and they had discovered it together. That, she thought, was worth fighting for regardless of the consequences. The Galactic Council Investigation Committee delivered their verdict at noon in a formal ceremony attended by representatives from 37 different species. Zarathel stood beside Marcus in the Great Assembly Hall, both of them displaying the calm patterns of individuals who had accepted that their personal future was now secondary to the broader implications of their research. War leader Thak Morel spoke first, his massive frame commanding attention even among the diverse gathering of alien dignitaries. "The committee has spent 4 days evaluating the claims made by Princess Zarathel and Ambassador Marcus Chun regarding cooperative evolution between different sapient species," he announced in his deep, resonant voice. "Our investigation included individual interviews, separate evaluation of research data, and direct observation of the physiological adaptations both subjects have developed. The hall was completely silent as 12 different types of consciousness waited to hear a decision that could reshape galactic civilization. Our findings are as follows, Thakmarel continued. First, the research data presented by the Human-Voltharian Partnership is accurate and reproducible. Multiple independent verification procedures confirm that cooperative partnership between different species can produce evolutionary adaptations that exceed what either species can achieve individually. Zarathel felt Marcus's hand briefly squeeze hers, both their patterns showing cautious relief. Second, similar results have been achieved by 17 other species combinations that have initiated cooperative partnerships based on preliminary data from this research. The cooperative evolution principle appears to be a universal property of consciousness interaction rather than a specific human Voltharian phenomenon. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembly. Zarathel realized that many of the species representatives were hearing about the broader implications for the first time. Third, Thakmarel's voice became more serious. The personal compatibility between Princess Zarathel and Ambassador Chun represents a genuine partnership based on intellectual compatibility, emotional attraction, and shared commitment to advancing knowledge that benefits all sapient species. The war leader paused, his own patterns showing what might have been approval among his species. The committee unanimously concludes that their proposed marriage alliance should be approved and supported as a model for future interspecies cooperative relationships. Relief flooded through Zarathel, but she could sense that the announcement wasn't complete. However, Thakmarel continued, and the hall fell silent again. The broader implications of cooperative evolution present challenges to existing galactic order that require unprecedented responses. The Eternal Scholar's harmonic voice joined the announcement. The current structure of galactic civilization is based on competitive balance between different species, each maintaining separate territories and specialized roles within a larger economic and political framework. Cooperative evolution suggests that this structure actively prevents beneficial development by discouraging deep partnership between different types of consciousness. One of the AI consciousness entities contributed its crystalline tones to the discussion. Preliminary modeling indicates that universal adoption of cooperative evolution principles could increase technological advancement rates by several orders of magnitude, reduce resource conflicts between species, and produce solutions to problems that have remained unsolved for millennia. The question, the scholar continued, is whether galactic civilization is prepared for the level of change that such advancement would require. King Telandris rose from the Voltharian delegation. What specific changes are you suggesting? Thakmarel activated a holographic display that showed current political maps of galactic space, with clearly defined territorial boundaries between different species. Cooperative evolution requires sustained interaction between different species, which is difficult to achieve under the current system of separate territorial control and competitive resource allocation. The display shifted to show alternative organizational models. The committee recommends the establishment of cooperative research zones where multiple species can work together on projects that benefit all participants. These zones would operate under different political and economic principles than current territorial arrangements. A representative from the Zinthri Empire stood immediately. Such zones would undermine the territorial sovereignty that maintains peace between species. Without clear boundaries and established hierarchies, conflict is inevitable. With respect, Marcus spoke for the first time during the ceremony. Conflict under the current system is also inevitable, because competitive resource allocation guarantees that one species' advancement requires another species' disadvantage. His voice carried clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. Cooperative evolution offers the possibility of advancement that benefits all participants. Theoretical advancement, the Zinthri representative replied coldly. Actual implementation could destroy the political stability that has maintained peace for a millennium. The AI consciousness entity responded with harmonics that suggested logical analysis. Current political stability depends on preventing beneficial relationships between species. This represents optimization for short-term conflict avoidance rather than long-term advancement. Sustainable stability requires systems that promote beneficial cooperation rather than suppress it. Another representative spoke up, a delegate from the silicon-based builders whose crystalline form shimmered as it communicated. Our recent partnership with the Aquatic Collective has produced architectural techniques that neither species could develop independently. The benefits of cooperative evolution are already being demonstrated across multiple applications. The debate continued for 2 hours, with representatives arguing about the practical implications of implementing cooperative evolution on a galactic scale. Zarathel listened to the discussion with growing understanding that their personal marriage had become symbolic of a fundamental choice about the future direction of galactic civilization. Finally, the Eternal Scholar called for silence. The committee proposes the following implementation framework, its harmonic voice announced. Cooperative research zones will be established in neutral space, governed by principles designed to facilitate beneficial partnerships between different species. Participation will be voluntary, and existing territorial arrangements will be maintained for species that prefer current competitive systems. A parallel civilization, Zarathel realized aloud. Precisely, Fac Morel confirmed. Species that choose cooperative evolution can pursue that path without forcing unwilling participants to abandon familiar systems. Competition between the two approaches will determine which produces superior long-term results. The Zen3 representatives' patterns showed deep disapproval, and when the cooperative zones produce superior technology and economic advantages, competitive species will be forced to join or accept permanent disadvantage. This is conquest by seduction rather than force. This is choice, Marcus corrected firmly. No species will be required to participate in cooperative zones, and no species will be prevented from establishing their own competitive alliances. We're simply removing the prohibition against beneficial cooperation that currently exists. The vote will be conducted according to standard Galactic Council procedures, the scholar announced. Each species delegation has 72 hours to consult with their home governments before casting their formal decision. As the assembly began to disperse, Zarathel and Marcus found themselves surrounded by representatives from dozens of different species, many asking detailed questions about their research and the practical implications of cooperative evolution. Princess, a delegate from the hive minds, approached. Our preliminary experiments in partnership with individual consciousness species have produced remarkable results. Would you be willing to share detailed protocols for sustaining cooperative relationships across fundamental biological differences? Ambassador Chun, another representative, interjected. The military applications of cooperative evolution could revolutionize how we approach defense against external threats. The Terran colony's success against the Keth Mori was just the beginning of what human cooperative strategies could accomplish in partnership with other species' capabilities. For 3 hours, they answered questions, shared research data, and discovered that their work had already inspired cooperation experiments throughout the galaxy. By the time the crowd dispersed, Zarathel was exhausted but exhilarated. We've started something that's already bigger than us, Marcus observed as they walked through the palace gardens that evening. Are you ready for that level of responsibility? Zarathel asked, echoing the question the Eternal Scholar had posed during her individual evaluation. I'm ready to see where it leads, Marcus replied. 6 weeks ago, we were 2 individuals from different species trying to figure out whether we were compatible. Now we're part of a galactic movement toward cooperative advancement that could transform civilization itself. They paused beside the fountain where Marcus had first explained his theories about cooperative evolution, and Zarathel realized how much had changed since that conversation. Her own bioluminescent patterns had become more sophisticated, responding to emotional nuances she'd never experienced before meeting Marcus. His skin showed adaptations that allowed him to display complex Veltharian emotional sequences that took most of her species decades to develop. But more than the physical changes, their partnership had evolved into something that neither of them could have imagined when they first began working together. The vote will pass, Zarathel said with quiet confidence. Too many species have already experienced the benefits of cooperative evolution to reject the opportunity for expanded partnerships. And then we get to build the future we've been theorizing about. Zarathel's patterns shifted to warm gold mixed with anticipation. Cooperative research zones throughout the galaxy, partnerships between species that have never worked together before, technological advancement that benefits everyone rather than creating competitive advantages for individual species. Marcus smiled with the expression that had become so familiar she couldn't imagine her future without it. Together, Zarathel confirmed. As research partners, marriage allies, and founders of the most important advancement in galactic civilization. 3 days later, the Galactic Council vote was announced. 41 species voted to approve the establishment of cooperative research zones. 12 species voted against the proposal. 6 species abstained, requesting time to observe the results before committing to either approach. The Zinthri Empire formally withdrew from the Galactic Council rather than participate in a system that facilitated cooperative evolution. But even they established a monitoring presence in neutral space to observe the results. Within 6 months, the first cooperative research zone was established in the Kepler 442 system, with facilities designed to accommodate the biological needs of 17 different species. Princess Zarathel and Ambassador Marcus Chun were appointed as co-directors of the zone's Xenobiology Research Division. Within a year, technological advancement in the cooperative zones had exceeded predictions by over 300%. Solutions were developed for problems that had stymied individual species for millennia. New forms of art, philosophy, and scientific understanding emerged from partnerships between radically different types of consciousness. Within 3 years, requests for expansion of the cooperative zone system exceeded available space resources, and planning began for the establishment of cooperative settlements throughout the galaxy. And in the center of it all, a human and a Veltharian who had begun their relationship questioning whether their species were compatible had created something that neither of them could have achieved alone. Mother, why am I being forced to wed a human? Had become the question that reshaped galactic civilization. The answer, as Zarathel reflected 5 years later, while watching their first child play in gardens that combined the botanical traditions of 17 different species, was that sometimes the most revolutionary discoveries begin with the most personal questions. Their marriage had become the foundation for the greatest advancement in galactic history, not because it was forced upon them by political necessity, but because they had chosen to approach their differences as opportunities for mutual growth rather than obstacles to be overcome. In the end, cooperative evolution had proven to be more than just a scientific theory. It had become a way of living that transformed not just individual relationships, but the nature of civilization itself. And it had all started with 2 people from different worlds discovering that partnership could create possibilities that neither had imagined alone.